Good day. I'm Martin Gago with Market Radius Research. It is Wednesday, November the 30th, 2022. We've got CEO Dan Blondal of Nano One Materials joining us today. Nano One is a developer of low-cost, high-performance lithium-ion cathode materials. The Nano One team has been very busy over the last 5 months since we last talked with Dan, most notably closing the JMBM acquisition and the $10 million US Rio Tinto strategic acquisition. Dan, you have been hobnobbing with some fairly impressive people over the summer and have just returned from a Canadian delegation to Korea. Why don't we start there, and then we can dig into other aspects of the business. But first, just please remember, this is neither recommendation or investment advice. We're here to learn about the company. Dan, so tell us about your recent travels.
Well, great to see you. First of all, Martin, thank you very much for having me on the show. Listen, I just got back from Seoul, Korea. I was there with a government delegation with Minister Champagne from the industry ministry, and also we had Ben Chin from the Prime Minister's office, and of course delegations from the embassy in Korea. And we were there with the government, of course, to meet some of Korea's sort of industry leaders in the space. There was a general delegation. There were people from the electronics and software industry, but there was a good contingent of us from the critical mineral space. Obviously, Canada's there to leverage some of the good relations between the two nations. I think particularly with the Inflation Reduction Act coming into place, that's really changed a lot of the dynamics between some of the have countries in the sense of lithium-ion batteries and lithium-ion battery materials, and countries like Canada and the US who are trying to attract their business to here to supply the burgeoning electric vehicle market.
Korea is, I believe, the number 2 battery developer in the world. So, and for them to participate in the IRA, they got to get battery production facilities and supply chain in North America in the free trade zones. So they obviously have to be looking at for the car companies to benefit from the incentives using North American produced batteries. Are obviously looking at partnerships or how to fill out their supply chain. And is that essentially what the discussions are about?
Yeah, very much so. Look, the Korean companies make a tremendous amount of the nickel-based cathode materials. A big part of their supply chain for those materials comes out of China, and obviously that won't fly under the new Inflation Reduction Act in the US. So certainly, as they really take hold, I mean, you can look at the various partnerships that have happened, POSCO and GM. You've got in Bécancour, you've got you've got SK and Ford in the US, LG and Stellantis in Southern Ontario, and LG, of course, involved in many other places as well. These are all just examples of how Korea is kind of bringing its powerhouse, its industrial know-how to the table to help address some of the shortcomings we have in the supply chain. So yes, we're very much talking to some of those industrial giants as well as new entrants. Korea is obviously has done a tremendous job of industrializing itself in the kind of 60 years since it kind of freed itself from obviously the conflict they had way back then, and what you see there is this these huge industrial groups that are looking to either they're firmly in the lithium-ion battery space, or they want to get into it, and so there's tons of opportunity there for collaboration.
Do they view you as like a frenemy? Like you have a different type of cathode that may impede on their market share, or obviously it's an evolving technology industry where you have to keep evolving and updating. How do they perceive you? And I presume each different partner in the supply chain views you differently, but any sort of broad views?
Yeah, listen, LG and POSCO and all these different companies, they all have very, very different DNA. They think about things differently. But I would say the things that they are attracted to at Nano One are that, first of all, we don't have a PCAM, essentially, which is the precursor to making the cathode material. So they rely on nickel, manganese, and cobalt to be worked up chemically in China, sent over to them. They lithiate it, cook it in a furnace, and put it in a battery. And we add lithium, nickel, manganese, and cobalt, for instance, all into our one pot process. There is no PCAM. So we solve a big problem for them, is that they won't have to rely on a PCAM coming from China. It's not going to be accepted under the IRA anyways. So that's quite attractive to the Korean cathode makers, because it solves a problem for them. However, it's new technology. Of course, they're looking to, what they're looking to do in North America is to take what they have and just kind of duplicate it. They don't want to, want to take as little risk as possible, but they also realize that they have to make changes to the supply chain in order to be competitive and move forward. So there's tons of opportunity from a collaboration point of view. And then on the LFP front, this is partly where it gets interesting. So the Koreans traditionally have not embraced LFP at all. I think they see it as a China-only opportunity. But it couldn't be further from the truth. The reason LFP flourished in China, there's really three things. The first one is there were patents preventing it from flourishing outside of China. There were, and those have expired. There is LFP was considered a low energy density cathode material, but these kind of third generation batteries that are now coming out of that battery packs that are now going into vehicles are reaching energy densities that are competitive with NMC. And we're seeing that in Tesla Model 3s and Model Ys already outside of China, North America, and Europe. And then lastly, supply chain. So the way the supply chain is built in China favors one way of making cathode materials that is not really very viable outside of China. And Nano One solves that third problem. And so we believe that by accessing a much simpler supply chain, by going directly from iron metal powders with our partner, let's say Rio Tinto, we can actually come to the table with a solution that's lower cost, lower capex, lower operating expenses, a much smaller environmental footprint, and all operating under a renewable energy kind of umbrella to make sort of the cleanest, greenest supply chain in the world. And that, we believe, will make LFP very important in North America. So the Koreans actually don't quite see that yet, because they've been kind of under the belief that nickel will dominate. We believe, of course, and you heard me say this before, that both will play an important role. And we think LFP will be not only for industrial storage applications, but also for any kind of small battery to mass market applications, probably up to about 450 kilometer range in electric vehicles, whereas the high nickel materials will dominate the longer range luxury electric vehicle end of the market.
We've discussed this before. There's not going to be one standard battery format in the future. There's going to be sort of different courses for different courses. This battery works better in this situation, or it has the right economics and so forth. So that's in part what you're saying, right?
Yes.
All right. In the summer, there was a large German delegation that came to Canada, which included Chancellor Olaf Scholz and the CEOs of, I believe, Volkswagen and Mercedes, as well as many other business, political dignitaries that toured 3 provinces. And it looked like they were, I guess, on the hunt for a reliable energy and materials partners and supply chain. I believe you were part of the welcoming dignitaries, a part of that. Tell us about that trip.
Yeah, no, correct. So listen, I was with many of the same sort of cast of characters, including the Prime Minister, Minister Champagne, Minister Wilkinson, Minister Ng, really a whole range of basically the whole Canadian government was there to really welcome this German delegation that came. There were again a few of us from the battery supply chain, largely on the critical minerals side and the refining side, but also of course us a little bit further downstream where the critical minerals come together to make a cathode. It was really a great door opener, and actually it really helped further the discussions that we have with our partner Volkswagen. It helped open the doors with Mercedes, BMW, and a variety of other German players as well.
So countries like Germany and Canada that have maybe an outsized portion of their economy based on the auto industry, which is heavily based currently on the ICE, internal combustion engine technology. We're all trying to figure out a way and a path forward to be relevant in the new age of electrified vehicles. And that is a large strategic government geopolitical current that's sweeping through here. And I'm not sure what the question is, but I guess, do you see it that way as well? And that, I guess, creates hopefully some great opportunities for you.
Well, look, I think it at the end of the day, what this comes down to, both Korea and Germany, and look, the government was also in Japan recently, and just launched this whole Indo-Pacific strategy earlier this week. It really stems around the fact that Canada has the talent, has the renewable energy, has the critical minerals, has a thriving kind of ecosystem, as we've seen from all these anchor investors that are coming into Canada. And also has access to large emerging markets in the EV sector that would include North America, of course, but also ultimately Europe and the Indo-Pacific region. So the government's out really marketing those benefits to countries like Germany, Korea, Japan, really with the intent of leveraging some of their industrial powerhouse to partner with Canadian companies to develop secure, reliable, consistent, and really differentiated supply chains that can last into the future. Canada's looking for like-minded nations. They don't want to get stuck with some of the sort of the geopolitical unrest and disruption to the supply chains that we've all been feeling over the last couple of years. They're trying to fix those problems, and in partnering with the Germans, the Koreans, the Japanese, they are essentially trying to resolve those long-range issues to just give us more security at the end of the day.
And 10 months ago, I guess now, with the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, Russia being a massive supplier of raw materials, energy, and other ones to Europe, it's horrible to say, but that's kind of probably benefited Canada and possibly Nano One in terms of Europe looking to find other supply chains, not just having the most efficient, but a robust where they can't be held hostage. Is that driving part of this as well?
No, absolutely, and certainly the distancing from China is also doing the same thing. Careful distancing, because of course we still rely heavily on many products out of China, but we'll see that. I think that relationship probably cool down more and more, and really see much more of that supply chain be localized. Like it's not just the Russia and China issues here that are driving this. I think there has been a general, during COVID, we saw the collapse of supply chains all over the place, and I think everyone realized we needed greater security in that way, and so that was already starting to happen with relationships with China frosting over, and of course Russia being a completely no-go zone. It has really accelerated the trend we've seen to deglobalize these supply chains and become more self-sufficient with localized, secure sources of critical minerals, for instance.
Yeah, it's really gone from the whole world supply chain. What's the most efficient to, hey, we need a robust supply chain as well that can handle hiccups and that.
Yeah.
The Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. Is that as big of a game changer as it seems to be?
Yeah, I think there was a response this morning out of Europe. I haven't read it. I just saw the headline on the basically a response to the IRA, because I think everyone is realizing that they've got to bolster their own economies, or they'll get left out of what the U.S. has to offer from a supply chain point of view. So everyone is scrambling to fund companies and their own internal supply chains in order to support the sort of the greater Western economy. So yeah, it's a big deal. IRA is great. I think great for Canada in many regards, because look, we have the raw materials. We need to refine them here in the country. It will lead to, I think, some great success for us on the cathode materials and anode materials point of view. We will see some battery production. Look, by and large, that's going to happen close to the OEMs, wherever they are, whether that's in Detroit or Windsor or Chattanooga or wherever in the U.S. or in Germany. But I think gone are the days where we're just going to have to export raw materials to have them come back as a refined material or a value-added battery. I think we can participate much further down the supply chain than we have traditionally, and so that's good for Canada. And I think the Inflation Reduction Act really kind of puts that on a pedestal and heightens the value propositions that Canada has for these other big industrial nations, and that's why we're seeing trips from the Germans and the Japanese and the Koreans to Canada to try and bolster relations and be a part of that supply chain.
All right, focusing in, we're talking very big global stuff here. Candiac. Why, I've got a bunch of questions here, but why don't you just give us a bit of an update, an overview on what's happened, what's going on there, impressions, and so forth.
Yeah, so we obviously closed the acquisition on November the 1st, and which gave us the keys to the facility in Candiac, Quebec. Candiac is on the South Shore, so just about 20 to 30 minutes outside of Montreal. And it's a 80,000 square foot facility with a 2,400 nameplate ton per annum LFP plant in it, and a team of about 50 people. It is the only LFP plant in North America today, and that is the most experienced LFP team outside of China. They have that plant's been in operation for 10 years. The average tenure of the employees there is 8 or 9 years. A number of them have been there since it really kicked off 17, 20 years ago in 2022. It used to be called Fostech Lithium. Fostech was formed in the early 2000s. They developed 2 different LFP manufacturing technologies and commercialized them both. One of them was frozen out of use because of patent disputes, and the second one became the mode of making LFP in the plant up until the 1st of November. So that team is not only operationally very strong, has been making LFP for 10 years and supplying into the automotive space, albeit in small volumes. They have developed from the ground up 2 different processes, and now with Nano One, they will be commercializing a 3rd. So just a really strong group to bring into the fold, extremely complementary to what we do at Nano One. Our facilities and operations in Burnaby, BC are by and large on the innovation side. We take the technology to a certain scale, and then really the model is to then commercialize and scale it up much larger at the Candiac facility to get to a point where we have a turnkey solution, let's say a turnkey LFP manufacturing solution that we would then use for much wider expansion, either into Canada, North America, or Europe. Basically call it a blueprint, a plant that we can then duplicate in various areas to support, let's say, an automotive production line or other needs in the LFP space, and ultimately also NMC and LNMO. We will be piloting, and we will be piloting LNMO and NMC there at a smaller scale. It'll be in it's not as technically robust yet as our LFP solution, but the idea is to get it there and then use this as a platform, a launch pad to commercialize different chemistries under the one pot and metal to cam process.
So what's going on in Candiac right now? What is the team focused on? They're not producing cathode material at this point? Are they? They're sort of rejigging things for the one pot process?
Yes, so the process for making LFP at that plant by Johnson Matthey had become commercially really kind of unscalable. Just had become with the rise in price of lithium and various other things, it just became commercially very difficult to scale that business. So we basically turned the taps off, and we are refitting the equipment and doing a bunch of trials. Those trials will take somewhere between 6 and 8 months to initiate and start getting results out of. And that will inform us on how we will scale the existing plant and how we might build a much larger facility on the land package that came with the acquisition.
So with the existing facility, right, it had a 2,400 ton per annum capacity on it. Is the plan just, it's sort of a pilot plant where they try out new facilities, or are you planning on getting it up to like production scale, albeit relatively small, I believe, where you're actually selling material and then you sort of work out the kinks and then you're going to design out the bigger facility, the blueprint, so that you can figure out where to put sort of replicates of that, or what does the next 6 or 8 months look like?
Yeah, well, that's basically the concept. But listen, we don't know the details until we've done the trials. The trials will tell us, at a larger scale how our materials react in reactors, teach us how to spray dry them, teach us how to cook them in the furnace, and that'll then define the throughput of the process. We will then either shoehorn in the existing facility to something to be operationally a little bit larger for third-party sampling and for sale to smaller parties, because of course that plant is way too small to supply, let's say, an automotive line. So we're developing those relationships with offtake and partners with the intent of ultimately selling materials out of a relatively small production line. But it will become our, let's call it, it becomes our kind of our learning curve. We're better off to learn in a small plant, especially with the price of raw materials the way they are. That's the place to learn about the process and then define what a much larger plant will look like. We're thinking about a plant that's maybe 2 to 10 times the size of that plant that we have there, or 4 to 10 times, actually, probably somewhere between 10,000 tons and 30,000 tons per annum would be what we think will be, in the 2025, 26 timeframe. That'll be the kind of the unit of operation that will be acceptable for LFP and will be needed to feed plants that are, anywhere in the, a plant that might be 100,000 tons in size. You'd want to have, 3, 4, 5 of these lines in one plant. And so we're doing these trials partly to understand how our process behaves at large scale, and then at the same time using that to define the engineering plans for a larger facility, which will then become a turnkey solution for expansion into either into Quebec, into central Canada, into the US, Europe, and possibly India as well.
And just to people to realize, like, scaling operations like this, going from bench to pilot to commercial, that's a huge deal. That like engineers lose sleep at night as they try to all the different dynamics of scaling these things. Correct?
That is correct, and that's why actually having this team from Condiac is so critical to us. Like, they've already done it twice, and they're about to embark on a third time. And we've got just a fantastic team with a tremendous amount of confidence in this. So we're fairly confident. It's just a matter of time doing the trials, and that will teach the engineers how these things react, and that'll give them a better sleep. At the end of the day, that's what these trials are about: is figuring out how this thing works at scale. And we're very fortunate to have permitted land, all the equipment we need, all the people we need, the support really of the province of Quebec, the support of the Canadian government, all kind of backing us, and of course the support of Rio Tinto. That's a sort of a big part of it. Look, they know how to industrialize. They know how to go to millions of tons of material, and that's not to be underestimated. We have all the sort of pieces in place to really accelerate the scale up of these materials.
With an LFP facility, like transportation can be a considerable cost. Is it more, do you think economically it makes more sense for it to be closer to the source of the raw material supply or closer to the end user? So that if it's closer to the supply, then you're shipping sort of the higher value product as opposed to shipping the lower value product further, or?
Yeah. So if we kind of look at the way it's played out in markets like in China and Korea, as we were talking about before, I think you have to get your you have to refine your raw materials down to the most basic components, because otherwise you're just shipping around, waste materials, shipping around water and concentrates that are you're gonna have to deal with all the waste streams from that. So you're better off to deal with that at the source in all cases. So I think the mining and refining down to the base materials, the base metals, is really key to happen close to the source, and ultimately that means in Canada, in our case. But you also don't want to you don't want to start shipping the way the supply chains work today. You don't want to start shipping nickel and cobalt sulfate around the world, because it's only 20% nickel. The rest, it goes into a waste stream, and so we believe that cathode materials really need to be close to the refiners. Ultimately, if we can, we sidestep the sulfate, we can go directly from nickel metal. We don't need to be co-located, because shipping nickel metal is much more efficient than shipping nickel sulfate. But it makes sense for us to be close to to all the components, kind of where they all come together. Once you've made the cathode material, there is no waste shipping, so you can ship the cathode anywhere you want. And it's in its kind of final form before it goes into the battery. So we think that the opportunity is certainly in Canada is to own that whole part of the supply chain, from the cathode materials and the anode materials all the way upstream into through cathode manufacturing, any precursor that has to happen. Obviously the purification, the refining, and the mining. So that's really where I think the opportunity lies. Whether we make cells, modules, battery packs here in Canada, that's going to depend very much on the end user. So if it's going into buses in Quebec, then we'll do it there. If it's going into autos in the US, then it's probably going to happen in the US, or it may happen at the boundary on the 49th parallel, kind of shipping in both directions. So I certainly see some great opportunity there. The IRA gives tremendous amount of credit. There's a tremendous amount of benefit to be bringing North American materials kind of into American vehicles, and ultimately we think that'll play out very well for Canada. We will be seen domestically, and those the credit that the U.S. companies see will spill over into demand for Canadian materials. So it's all good for us, I think.
All right. You mentioned Rio Tinto, so that's a good segue here. Obviously, they put in 10 million US investment, and I think probably more importantly, a collaboration agreement. So great validation that you're doing something right, and one of, or the largest miner in the world thinks you're doing good things. How is that progressing, and can you give some more sort of insight or color to that relationship?
Yeah, look, the $10 million investment was great. Actually, it came at a time where we set aside $10 million for Condiac. So nice to have a nice clean kind of balance sheet at the end of those two transactions. But it's not just an investment; it's very much a collaborative environment. We're working on, of course, we're working on raw material supply. So they're an up and coming lithium supplier, and we'll be working with them on that front. And they're obviously a very large miner and producer of iron ore. They have a facility that is about 100 kilometers north of our facility in Quebec, and they're in a town called Sorel. Sorel is their facility in Sorel is probably one of the largest iron and titanium smelting facilities in the world today. It is a metallurgical process, and so they extract iron, basically iron ore, in big, large arc furnaces that are all powered by hydroelectric power. They get an iron melt out of that, and they atomize it into powder. Some of that iron melt is atomized into powder for the largely for the automotive industry, for internal combustion engines, for instance. And as as that whole industry moves, as the automotive industry moves to electrify the drivetrains, they're looking for ways to diversify their customer base, and taking the iron metal powder directly into LFP is a really natural place to go, because it would be continue to go into the automotive space. So it's class 1 iron powder that's already automotive approved. We have the only LFP facility in North America that has been already has all the automotive and quality certification pieces in place. We have to prove out the one-pot process in that plant, but we believe it will ultimately lead to the kind of cleanest and greenest supply chain. There is no waste stream in that iron supply chain, and that's very differentiated from China. And anywhere else in the world, for that matter. So we believe that'll kind of really, ultimately, that's one of the dreams that we saw when we started talking to Rio Tinto, and we're happy to kind of be in the midst of trying to realize that. And then on top of that, they're technical sort of powerhouse. I mean, most people don't know that about Rio Tinto. They're a big miner, but their facility in Sorel is really knows how to scale and work at large volumes. So we'll be working with them on a number of collaborative fronts, not just on LFP, also on other cathode materials, and how we might improve the supply chain, much like we're trying to do on the LFP front.
You've mentioned a couple of times the automotive certification, that Candiac has those certifications and has the process to do that. That's a fairly material asset or knowledge base to have, that because automotive, they can't risk failure, especially on new technologies like batteries. So that you know how to go through those certification processes and have non-exploding batteries, so to speak, is pretty key.
Yeah, well, it's just reliability, just having having a product that comes out that they're putting into batteries, so the batteries perform the same, let alone obviously the safety issues are big, but the main thing is consistency and security of supply. So they want to make sure that the plant's going to keep operating, right, and that the people are operating in a safe manner there. So there isn't risk to the workforce, risk to the supply chain, risk to the quality and the consistency of the material. That's all really part of the underlying certification systems. And look, the certification itself is certainly a hoop you have to jump through. But what's really kind of underestimated here is just the core know-how. So everyone in that plant knows how to operate in that kind of an environment. And that's not something you can just go to a class and take and be ready to go. It takes many years. There's a lot of learning curve, a lot of mistakes along the way. And the team in Candiac has largely gone through that. So this really helps us bridge a learning curve that pretty much everyone else in North America is going to have to go after. And we can use that knowledge and that know-how, not just to operate that plant and build up more LFP, but we can use it to train more people and funnel more people through our system as we expand our business into other areas and into other chemistries. So it's not just an operational strength. It's very much a growth strength, because that experience can be imparted on other people, and we can actually we can train people and bring them up to speed without them having to go through all the bumpy learning curve and that and all the mistakes that you have to make to learn that stuff. So extremely important to us.
All right. BASF, I believe the world's biggest chemical company, partnership with them on the CAM process. Any updates to discuss on that?
Other than to say that, look, things are going very well. So the way that works, it's actually very similar to the relationship we have with Johnson Matthey. They have a series of proprietary cathode materials that they manufacture and market and sell. We have a way of making those materials that drives down the cost and the complexity and the energy intensity and the environmental footprint. That's what's attractive to them. So we're collaborating together to make their materials using our process. Ultimately, it's a multi-phase, multi-year process. Things are going reasonably well. We hope to bring some updates to the market as we kind of get through stage gates. But I can say right now that we're happy with the results. BSF has been a wonderful partner. We're not just kind of working behind a dark curtain. We're very much collaborating with them. They've been to our facilities several times now to help us work through some of the day-to-day challenges and us with them as well. So we're really excited about the group we have there. It's a very positive working environment, very collaborative and very forward-looking.
All right. One other news release over the summer on manganese and using the M2CAM technology. How manganese is obviously in some of the batteries very important. How significant was that news release?
I think what's significant about it is that manganese obviously comes in a multiple types of formats. The way manganese is used right now in the cathode process is typically dissolved in sulfuric acid to make manganese sulfate, or it goes directly into basically it goes directly into a liquor with the nickel and the cobalt to make a mixed metal sulfate before it's chemically upgraded to a hydroxide. That's actually where all the sulfate waste comes out of. And we've just found a way to go directly from electrolytic manganese, which is essentially a metal, avoiding the sulfate, and we're able to make good product with it. So it was really just a matter of working with Euro Manganese, their the product that's coming out of their pilot plants right now to verify that we can work with this high purity electrolytic manganese as a direct input into the cathode material, and thereby bypass the sulfating step. We haven't even kind of really touched on that, Martin, but the sulfating step is a really important part of our value proposition, or bypassing it. When I was at the Benchmark Minerals cathode conference in LA just 2 weeks ago, and one of the keynotes, Simon Morse stood up and said, hey, look, and if we got to get to 300 terawatt hours to meet the 2050 net zero goals, and he put up this chart and he showed, look at all this nickel sulfate we have to make, look at all this cobalt sulfate we have to make. Isn't it great? Let's go after that market. I mean, these are big challenges, but let's go after it. And I stood up shortly after him. I said, well, that's all fine, but 300 terawatt hours of battery production equals 1.2 billion tons of sodium sulfate byproduct that comes out of that, and that's all got to be dealt with. There really is no market for that extra volume. We can't put it all into fertilizer, and we certainly don't want to landfill it, and we certainly don't want to dump it in the oceans. And so it's a big challenge coming forward. It's a blind spot in the industry, and Nano One feels like we're playing into that blind spot. We're figuring out how to solve that problem for future generations. And so by going, this goes back to your question about Euro Manganese, by going directly from manganese metal or nickel metal or iron metal or cobalt metal, we can directly avoid the sulfate and avoid creating the resulting waste stream.
All right. You closed the Candiac acquisition November 1. It's not like they didn't let you in. You had, let's say, access to the facility, and you've been working closely with them. How has, I guess, your evolution of your perception when you first came up with the idea, the opportunity arose, your vision of Candiac and Nano, how has that evolved over the last 5, 6, 7 months or so since Candiac has come on the table?
Well, listen, it even started earlier than that. We hired Denis Geoffroy, who we recently announced as COO. We hired him well over a year ago to help us sort of build out an LFP strategy and a commercialization path in Quebec. The Johnson Matthey, the sale of that facility came on the auction block soon thereafter, and we went to it. Denis Denis was there in 2002 with Fostech Lithium until 2019. So he helped develop, design, build, and run that plant. He was the general manager there until 2019. So we had an inside track right out of the gate. We started developing a team. We hired an engineer out of Candiac last January. We hired their sales guy, Andrew Muckstad, put him on as our VP of Business Development back in May. So we have been building out a strategy around that plant for quite some time. We've had access to their engineers for the last 6 months to develop the plans for the evaluation process we're going through, so that we were able to hit the ground running on number one. We knew what we were going to do. We had the engineering plans. We'd already bought some of the longer lead items to get that evaluation kind of underway. So much of it is kind of in full steam right now.
All right, we are time's going fast here. So I guess just quickly on your finances, you've done well on the financial side of raising money at a good time, getting the Rio Tinto funding. Can you give us an update on the balance sheet, maybe as you build out and figure out Candiac, any budgets you can discuss or expected burn and so forth, and where this, I believe 46 or 48 million you have right now, how far is that going to get you?
Well, listen, obviously, taking on a new team, our burn rate's gone up. Obviously, we have lights to keep on and building to keep going, but we still have a very healthy treasury. Our burn is just I think it's going to be kind of in the $18 million range. I think that's what we've kind of budgeted for, but we have a bunch of capital expenditures and
sorry, 18 million a year.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I've got that number right. Someone might be cringing if I've got it a little bit wrong, but I think it's somewhere around there. And then obviously we're going to have some capital expenditures to build out the plant. We have some decisions to make kind of mid-year next year in terms of how we capitalize that, whether we dip into our treasury deeply, whether we go out and find other sources of funds to keep that healthy treasury alive. I mean, all of these are decisions are going to have to happen. Obviously, we all know what the markets are like right now. We're lucky not to be in a position where we have to go and raise money, but we also at the same time realize that really to expand and go fast, we're going to have to spend money, and but we don't have to do it right away. So decisions are coming on that, and a lot of the trials and the engineering work we're going to do right now, and some of the offtake partners that we're discussing expansion with will really kind of drive some of those decisions. So more on that in 2023.
And you've been a good recipient of a fair amount of government funding, non-dilutive funding. I presume there's more of that, especially as both on a provincial Quebec basis, they want to build up their supply chain, and on a Canadian basis. Recent news, E3 Lithium just got, I believe, 27 million from the government to help develop their stuff. So there are checks to be written. I presume, like, you can't sort of say what you're going to get, but you're pursuing things like that, I presume. Yeah,
for sure. As you can see, we're pretty well entrenched with the Canadian government. I've spent a lot of time with ISED, which is Minister Champagne's ticket, and obviously also with Minister Wilkinson on the NRCan side, and there's a tremendous amount of support. We have delivered very well to Sustainable Development Technology Canada, SDTC, over the years, and they continue to be there and support us. And so lots of, and there's SIF money available. That takes a long time to get in the door, but that's the money. That's the same money that E3 just got. There's a great pools of capital from the government to tap into when we're working with kind of all levels of governments, provincial and federal, and all departments as well. And on top of that, we spent some time in Washington a month and a half ago, talking to the Pentagon, talking to the DOE, talking to the State Department, and various banks down there, really trying to map out what our expansion plans look like and how we might fund those, into the medium term and long term. So certainly we're working hard on that, and when we have news, we'll bring it out.
All right. I was hoping to, we've been having a great conversation here. Appreciate it. We are, I'm going to get to the questions from the audience here and try to get through as many of these as possible here. So the non-Chinese JDA partner ultimately did not see a market for LMNO material to justify going to pilot. What do you see as the future for this material in terms of a likely path and partners to pilot and commercialization production?
It's a great question. So LNMO, while the challenge is that LNMO, which is a high voltage, our high voltage spinel, has to go into a high voltage battery, and they don't exist yet today. So there are a number of parties developing high voltage batteries, and we're a little bit ahead of the curve on that material, and that's why we really kind of had to put the brakes on the on further development in Asia on that. However, we do see a tremendous opportunity there still. We think LNMO will play a very critical role in the battery supply chain. It's going to fill. It's fast charging. It can be long lasting when paired with the right electrode. Excuse me. It can be when paired with the right electrode, it can be very, very fast charging and long lasting. And we have so what we will be doing with our LNMO, we're going to be piloting it ourselves in Candiac, building out a pilot facility that will also be used for the high nickel materials, the NMC materials, and that will become a platform for third-party evaluation. We'll simply just build our own markets. We're looking for support from players like we had in Asia. Perhaps they will be part of that. Perhaps it'll be other players. But rather than piloting it in Asia, we're going to do it right in our own backyard under our own control, and build the markets from there, and invite players like them to participate in that growth through our piloting facility.
All right. What is the most likely chemistry that Nano will take to independent production after LFP at Candiac?
That's a great question, actually. It could be a derivation of LFP. We could be LMFP, but that kind of let's put that in the same family. I think that the LNMO opportunity is actually quite interesting, although as I say, we're still waiting for those battery those cell designs to really sort of come into fruition. And that's really where we have one of the greatest advantages, because we're well ahead of the curve. We can make a very high performance LNMO material. That's very clear. It's really just a matter of having the right partnerships and market for it. So a little bit unclear when that's going to happen. And then on the NMC front, look, it's a very crowded space. You've got all these players coming into Canada, and all this momentum in the way nickel NMC materials are being made. However, as I said earlier, there's a big blind spot. That sulfate waste stream makes that sulfate process makes the supply chain complicated. We're going to have to build refineries all over the place to make sulfates. All the recycled materials are going to have to go through a sulfate process, and all of that's going to lead to the billions of tons of waste that I spoke of earlier. So that's got to get solved, and there's no way we can scale to tens of millions of tons and get to terawatt hours with that kind of a byproduct in the way. So we have a really tremendous opportunity here to change the way the NMC cathode materials are being made. But look, I'll be honest, it's not a easy thing to change. It's a freighter. We got to move it, and we have to do that in partnership with really large players, and that's why we're partnered with Volkswagen and other OEMs. That's why we're partnered with the mining companies. Really, it's at the bookends of the supply chain where we're going to see really the motivation to make that change. And ultimately, our partnership with BASF is hedging bets on making those changes. So we could see that come to market as we firm up the supply chains, and as we firm up the performance of the materials and their use in batteries. So it's not a really exact answer to that question, but that's how we think of it anyways.
All right. With the lack of access to lithium raw materials coming from North America, what is Nano One's plan to secure lithium supply, and when will it be needed to proceed with the company's next steps?
Look, we've already acquired lithium for the next year of our kind of operations, and but they're relatively low volumes. It's not that difficult. It's just really expensive. So we can get access to lithium carbonate. It's really just for the foreseeable future, it's a relatively small volumes, and so we don't really see any constraints other than cost kind of in the way right now. To get to much larger volumes in the second half of the decade as we expand, it's anyone's guess right now how that's going to play out. Looking beyond 2025, there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. We expect more lithium to come online. We expect direct lithium extraction technology to put more of it on the market. Obviously, the Canadian, Australian, and South American markets are growing as well, and so we're working with partners like Rio Tinto. We have strong relationships with some of the juniors in the lithium space, really all with the intent of collaborating on North American supply chains. I think no one really wants to be shipping their lithium carbonate or lithium chloride off to China to only to be converted back, because there's obviously restrictions now in the Inflation Reduction Act that are going to sort of impose, make it more difficult. And so finding a home for that material in North America is going to be really important. And we're aiming to make that easier by being able to go directly from lithium carbonate in the high nickel materials, and obviously that's what LFP does as well. So no shortage of phone calls happening and meetings happening between us and the big lithium producers, but no immediate problem on the supply chain point of view, because our volumes aren't that large as we ramp things up.
All right. What is the rough order of magnitude of capital requirements of a greenfield building or facility using Nano's process for, let's say, a 10,000 ton per annum plant?
Yeah, like 10,000 ton per annum could be kind of in the $100 million range from a capex point of view, and obviously as you go to larger volumes, there's some economy of scale.
Okay.
Roughly speaking, yeah.
Yeah, or order of magnitude sort of scale there. All right. So I'm reading these a lot as we go. So at a time when we see announcements in the battery space at a perceived rate of 2 to 3 times a week, what does Nano continue its path of secrecy about its collaborators? Are you able to discuss more of who you're collaborating with?
Well, I would say a secrecy about our collaborators is not a strategy. We would love to talk about them. We just can't. We're under non-disclosure agreement, so it's not a strategy. It's just a reality. Look, the auto companies don't want to, as you're working with your auto companies, they're hesitant to talk about some of their partnerships, like with Nano One, because it might hurt their existing supply chain agreements with a larger cathode producers. Certainly bringing BASF and Rio Tinto to the table has totally changed that, and I think the willingness to discuss and disclose has become greater. And when we're able to disclose, we will. I'm just saying it's not a strategy. It's just an imperative.
Yeah. Someone saying here, as a patient 7-year investor, where will revenue come from, and around when do you think that sort of time frame would start happening?
Look, the LFP is going to obviously be our first point of revenue, and the trials this year will tell us, how close we're going to get to that. But it's really just around the corner. We could see some. We could see early revenues, coming into play in 2024. If we're really lucky, something a little bit earlier than that. But until we understand the quality and performance of the materials coming out of the plant in next year, we can't really kind of firm that up. But that will, the goal is to drive up the quality of those materials, get it to the point where there's offtake. That offtake will then, govern some of the decisions we're making about scale up. And it'll be in relative, and if it's in the existing plant, it'll be relatively small volumes. And if it drives, if it drives what we do in the larger plant, then we'll obviously see larger revenues coming from that. It'll take some time to build the larger plant and get it operational, but it's kind of 2026 timeframe.
All right. The one-pot process and DLE, direct lithium extraction, seem to complement each other and reduce water and waste streams. Is Nano One exploring direct DLE, incorporating that into one pot somehow?
No, not at all. And we're not the least bit interested in refining materials or any of that work right now. I mean, it's look, we take refined materials like lithium, nickel, manganese, and cobalt, lithium iron, and phosphorus, and combine them into a composite material, cathode material. And we're not really pushing upstream at all. We are very interested in partnering with folks doing that, and trying to create leaner, cleaner supply chains through those partnerships. But at the end of the day, we're not going to be pushing upstream at all.
This is my question here, and we do have to wrap this up here shortly to respect your time here, which thank you very much. A lot's happened, obviously, with Nano over the last 6 months. When you pick up the phone and call someone, or how is the world's perception, I guess, on various fronts, on suppliers, on potential customers, on investment community? How is the various call it stakeholders, how have their perception of Nano changed over the last 6 or 12 months?
Look, I think the obviously acquisition of this facility, the fact that we own a production facility in Quebec, really puts us on the world stage with partners like Rio Tinto and BASF. And people are listening. We get calls. We get we can call people and people pick up with the backing of the federal government. It's absolutely stunning what Invest in Canada, what the what access to the Prime Minister, what access to the to ISED and NRCan can do to a meeting room when the government calls. And we at PDAC, I went to probably one of the most amazing meetings I've ever been to, or socials. It was basically all of the CEOs of all of the companies that we need to or are already talking to in a kind of a global context, all in one room, and all because the Canadian government put their hand up and said, well, let's all get together and talk. And so that and we have a seat at that table. It's quite remarkable, actually, what's happened in the last 6 months for us.
All right. And one final question: over the next 3, 6, 12 months, what types of news updates should investors be expecting from Nano? And let's say, in terms of, obviously, if there are partnerships, that'll come up, but in terms of maybe the progression of Candiac or other R&D or product development type things, what generally to keep our eyes open for?
Well, look, there's going to be progress news, progress updates on our various partnerships, and as much as we can talk about those, we will. We mentioned earlier we are pursuing government support, so news on that government support when we can disclose, and when we have more information out about it, we will certainly be bringing that to the table. We're not stopping at the partnerships we have. Obviously, I was in Korea for a reason. We're looking to build out relationships with some of the sort of the Korean technical giants there, and add them to our ecosystem. So yeah, all of these things I think are going to help really catalyze us in 2023. We'll have the continual stream of patents and various other little I think bits of news as we build out our business. But those things, the partnerships, the funding, and the progress on those partnerships are really going to play a sort of a big role in what we do. And then as our commercialization plans and engineering plans emerge, those are going to be obviously important things for the market to know. Is how are we going to scale? How are we going to get to this demonstration plant? And then what's it going to look like after that? How are we going to take that plant and turnkey it into a whole bunch of much larger plants, in North America and around the world?
All right. Well, Dan, first to the audience, thank you very much. There are a bunch of questions here we were not able to get to. Thanks for all the questions and your patience. Dan, that was fun and very informative. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, and have a great day. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Great. Thanks, Martin. Always a pleasure. Can't wait till next time. Thanks.
Cheers.